Yahoo Sports Jordan Shusterman joining us on the Emerald Queen Casino Sportsbook Hotline. Jordan, how's it going?
Thank you so much for having me, guys. Yeah, this baseball thing's going to get started. How about that?
Quickly underway here. We already have a big name to talk about. Now, even without reports of a contract extension, we'd be psyched to see Cal Raleigh out there, right? A rock for this team. Your first reaction to, again, I just have to say reports. Obviously, the team hasn't confirmed, but reports that the Mariners extended Cal.
I mean, it's a hell of an achievement for the organization, for the player. I think what makes Cal such an obvious candidate for this to build around is the fact that he just impacts the team in so many ways. I've said many times, I've probably said on this show talking about Cal before, how important it is to have your franchise catcher, and Cal certainly became that a couple of years ago. The fact that he had that breakout season, that singular moment, the home run to send him to the playoffs, and he somehow just keeps getting better, keeps becoming even more important over the, for this franchise. And the reason I say touch all these different parts of the team, when you're building your entire team or so much is about the pitching staff, the catcher is a huge part of that equation. And I have to imagine that's a big part of why they wanted to have him in place, not to mention the fact that he's a historically productive power hitter at the catching position.
Jordan, Cal played a lot of games last year, man, and I worry about his body. Obviously, we watch more Mariners games than anybody. I don't know how many times I saw a ball just ricochet off his thigh. He takes 5 seconds and he's back in there. Do you think now they protect their investment a bit more and let him rest a bit, even though we know he wants to be out there every single day? What will your approach be? What do you think they're going to do?
Yeah, that is an interesting dynamic that I have to imagine kind of pulls in both directions, right? We always hear about how Cal wants to play through everything. The other way to think about it is he's like, you know what? I got security. I just got a $100 million contract. Like, I know where I'm going to be. I'm not necessarily, not that he's not motivated to play or that he doesn't want to play or anything, but in the same things with pitchers or maybe looking for kind of security with their contract situations more than position players, catchers, you just never know. And I think that's another part of it. Because of the beating that they take. It will be an interesting thing. Obviously, a lot of that also has to do with just how the roster revolves around him. But I also know that at this stage, he's still in his prime. He's going to want to be catching 120 games a year without a doubt. Maybe, once he gets into his 30s, you start seeing him DH some more. But at this point, I still expect him to be out there a lot, which I can totally understand being a little bit concerned about how he can handle that. But so far, he does it basically as good as anybody.
As part of his season preview, ESPN's Alden Gonzalez wrote that this season is kind of starts and ends with Julio's production. And, I mean, he's absolutely right. We just talked with David Schoenfield, who said, yes, absolutely the same thing. Jordan, I am assuming that you view the Mariners offense the same way, that it kind of begins and ends with Julio. Feels like that has to begin quicker, and that's kind of the key. Tell me what you're watching for from Julio's 2025 season.
Yeah, 100%. I thought it was interesting that him coming into this season, coming off of the success he had at the end of last season with kind of the new hitting group and the new leadership there, and then being very open this year about being like, I want to play in spring training. I want to get as many reps as I can to hopefully, get off to a better start. Now, the reality is that's all fun and good, and I have to imagine that's better than only getting, 5 to 10 games, which has been the case in some recent years. But as we've seen year after year, it's hard when these guys go back to Seattle and the weather's a little bit colder, whether it's in Seattle or on some of these other early road trips. It is definitely difficult. So I do think that it is all about him just because the variance is so wide, and it's the curse of greatness, right? I mean, you when you see him be one of the best players in baseball, you want that to happen every month. I think we know, because he's such a great center fielder, the floor for his overall production is certainly still very high. But yeah, I mean, he is the difference between this being an okay lineup and an actually good one.
Hey, Jordan, going back to Cal, one of the things I thought about after they signed Cal was, okay, what's next? And then the next thing I thought about was, what about Harry Ford? The young catcher who made some noise this spring. We hear he can play multiple positions. Does he just become trade bait? What do you see in the future for Harry Ford?
It's a great question, and Harry Ford is someone, it's funny thinking back to when they drafted him originally, and I was all in. I was all in on Harry Ford. It's been really cool to see his development, but that development has come as Cal Raleigh has become what he is. And, you know, there's other situations where there's a little bit more flexibility with the position and moving stuff around where you don't really worry too much about a single player blocking another player. But in this specific case, and for catchers in particular, like this is a case where it's like, yeah, like Cal's the guy. So I think that at this point, I think they still need to see what they have in him, because he is the kind of athlete that can probably still find a way to contribute in Seattle. If he's trade bait, he's trade bait. I mean, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Of course, you want to see as many homegrown players get to the big leagues as possible. But if he can become the kind of player that you could build a trade around, that's not necessarily a bad thing either. Even if, of course, you know, everybody wishes that all the top prospects could play together at once. But you know, the reality of this is, one, they're not all going to actually turn out to be that good. And then the other thing is, it's just there's only so many spots on the field. So it will be really interesting. He's absolutely a prospect for that situation that is going to be worth watching really closely this season.
I recently listened to your AL West preview for Baseball Barbiecast, and you and Jake talked about kind of like the favorites, specifically maybe looking at the Rangers, who are kind of a favorite for a lot of people around baseball, though always with the edit of, well, if they stay healthy. And it's why it feels like the Astros, Mariners, and Rangers are kind of grouped together. How can one team pull away from the other in the West here? It feels like such a tight group.
Yeah, and you know, the fun thing about this season is that you can apply that to a bunch of divisions, right? I mean, the American League is not exactly brimming with powerhouse teams. I think the reason why people are kind of falling for the Rangers, totally understandably, I ended up picking them to miss the playoffs barely. I was going back and forth between them and Detroit and Seattle and a couple other teams to make that last spot. I ultimately went with Detroit, but I think Texas, you can see the ceiling. The ceiling is pretty clear with that group, with the lineup that they've kind of rebuilt that we already thought was quite strong with some of the additions that they made. And then in theory, as you mentioned, the health on the mound, but the talent on the mound is also there from an impact standpoint. I ended up rounding down and picking against them just because I think that there are still too many questions on the mound. Just how in the same way for Seattle, I ended up kind of saying, well, like, as much as I love the pitching staff, I'm still seeing just a few too many questions on the position player side of things. But at the same time, I think you can make an argument for all these teams. And I did what I have done for the last decade, which is keep picking the Astros until I'm wrong.
Fair approach.
We go through the cycle, Stacey and I, of getting really critical when the season ends for the Mariners. They should have did this. This is why. And then waiting for them to make moves that we know aren't going to happen. And then opening week comes up, and we're like, okay, well, let's get excited about this team again. Who we got? We got Rowdy, we got Bliss, and we got Polanco over there. What's your process like when it comes to evaluating just the offseason for the Mariners? And do you agree? Oh, I want to ask that question. What do you make of the offseason that they've had and the team they put together?
Yeah, I mean, it is living in these social media circles, and just it's a long winter, and you get a lot of emotions over the course of those months, even when nothing is happening, right? Because that elicits an emotion in and of itself. And then, you know, you got this week, and now you're getting all this good news about streaming and Cal Raleigh and all this stuff, the commercials. And now it's like, oh, I love this team. This team's great. You know, why were we so angry the whole time? It's like, well, because it was December and you didn't have anything else to talk about. So yeah. I think I can understand, like, you go through a lot in the same way that you do over the course of the season. You see fans have kind of the same reaction over the course of the offseason. All of that is to say, I do think that that's the biggest question is what we saw in September meaningful, because they didn't make enough real changes to this roster that we are going to be like, oh, well, now they added this guy, so that's going to make a huge difference. Now, that said, Randy Arozarena is a massive piece, right? Victor Robles is a massive piece. Maybe Rowdy Tellez can be even something close to average, you know, as a DH, right? They've gotten so little out of that DH spot in recent years. You know, can Garver bounce back? So I think that there's still enough talent for this team to make the postseason. Absolutely. You know, the Kirby situation is a sobering reminder of how delicate that pitching staff was last year, and why I have all the faith in the talent and the production, but you just don't know with the durability that you're going to get the exact same thing as you did last year. So I still think, as I've said, I think I said that on the AOS preview, like, most teams would take the 4 starters, even if you're not talking about Kirby, right? So it's not just about Kirby there, him going down, and that depth is part of why this organization is still in a good place. But it's going to be about getting off to that better start. It's going to be about that offense not being such a slog. And then I think the bullpen has to be much better than it was last year. And I think Matt Brash coming back could be a huge part of that.
Hey, Jordan, your answer to this question might just be someone who can hit the ball. But is there kind of a piece that you find missing with the Mariners offense? Like we've talked about roster construction and not just philosophy, but kind of like, well, how is this team constructed? Where do you have too much talent here and too many deficits here? Is there a profile of a hitter that you think, God, if they could tap into this, it would really fill out this lineup?
Yeah, I think you could argue that they sort of attempted to get that with Donovan Solano, because you got, as we know, this is the real challenging part about evaluating the Mariners offense and the way that people talk about the offense is that there are some measures when you factor in the incredibly difficult ballpark to hit in, and you factor in walks and some power, that like overall it wasn't that bad of a group. But what is getting, and I know this sounds stupid, but when you're not getting a lot of hits and you're striking out a lot, you look even worse than you probably actually are. And so that is why I think they become such a infuriating unit when things are not working. And the reality is, like, Randy Arozarena isn't necessarily going to change that. Now, Randy does walk a lot, so that helps. But he also he likes to swing. He does like to swing. We know Julio likes to swing. We know, we know Cal, as awesome as he is, he's going to strike out. We know Luke Raley's going to strike out. So those things aren't necessarily fixed. I think Solano, I think this is what Justin Turner really brought, and I think you sort of saw that last year. I think Solano can kind of fit that. Other than that, I don't know. I think that a healthy J.P. Crawford could give you some more quality at bats. I think a healthy Jorge Polanco can do that too. But that's where the aesthetic part of this offense, I think, is what really drives people crazy, even though the overall production is maybe not as bad as it looks.
Infield has been a big topic this offseason, and Demo and Bliss battling it out at the second base spot. Rumors of Bliss not being able to catch up with the fastball. What do you prefer? Do you think you should start the season with Demo at second? You want to move him around, give Bliss a shot? If you're calling the shots, Jordan, what are you doing?
So this actually kind of caught me off guard because I've just been so busy with all the season preview stuff in the recent weeks that I haven't been following last-minute Mariners roster battles, and the fact that it seems like they are going to give Ryan Bliss a shot, I'm excited about that. I think that's cool. I mean, this is a player who was, of course, an important part of a trade who has generally succeeded, in AAA. He's 25. It's not like he's 20 years old, and I think it's worth seeing. He's going to be batting 7th, 8th, or 9th. It's not like you're putting him, batting 3rd. I think you kind of want to see what he can do, because if he can be something that is a little bit more closer to an above average or just like even an average offensive player, like Dylan Moore, as awesome as he is best as that first guy off the bench. And I think everybody sort of recognized that coming at the beginning of the winter, and when it became clear that the plan at second and third was bringing back Polanco and then Moore, it was like, really, like, is this really plan A? Bliss emerging, we'll see how it translates from the spring, it is an opportunity. I mean, this guy is has been considered a real prospect. Again, not expecting an all-star team, but I think giving him some real run when you haven't really seen it yet, I think that's a good opportunity for him, and I'm certainly excited because it's something different.
Okay, what's something that for the first month of the season, Bump and I both settled on, we are not going to find ourselves saying it's too early. Not with this team. This team has missed the postseason by collectively 5 games over 5, just something absurd. Just
over the last 10 years.
Exactly. And so while we've settled on, okay, we're not allowed to say, well, it's too early, we are allowed to measure things differently. Success in April looks different than success in August. So what's a version of a successful April? What's maybe, it could be a stat, it could be a good month from a specific player. What's something that you'll be looking at, Jordan, as you guys round out, with the pod or with any coverage for Yahoo Sports, and, we're heading into May, and you go, I like what the Mariners did in April because of this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, this is sort of this could also just be applied to just like these are the players I'm most interested in because of how it went last year. But I would say the three, really the two that I'm watching most closely in terms of returners is Gregory Santos. I think Santos until Brash gets back is a pretty big deal. I mean, you could also say Colin Snyder and just like the rest of the bullpen behind Munoz. But I think understanding if the bullpen could really be an actual strength as opposed to just like Andres Munoz and a lot of other guys doing their best. That Santos has the upside to make that happen. I think that's a big one. And then the one I've been saying all offseason is J.P. Crawford. I mean, he was one of the best shortstops in baseball in 2023, and he was very much not that last year. And I hope it was just because he was hurt, but we're going to have to find out, because when he was he was at the top of the lineup. And then I guess, honestly, like Robles and Randy, for totally different reasons, are just so important and so interesting. Randy feels more important because the stakes feel a lot higher. It's the opposite. Victor Robles fell in your lap, and he's just like this gift that has fallen from above, and you're like, oh man, this lovable player, he's stealing 30 bases, he's amazing, right? Whereas Randy is like, oh, you better come produce, dude. Like you were the big addition. And so them, with Julio, of course, could be the upside is tremendous there, but I think Randy is also has to be considered one of the most important players, and him getting off to a good start is also important.
Check out that AOS preview and obviously every new episode of Baseball Barbiecast, and check out Jordan's work, Yahoo Sports Jordan Shusterman. Thanks, Jordan.
Thanks, Jordan.
Thank you, guys.